Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Night Live. I'm Tanja from Tanja Kraus Horsemanship, and you're joining me tonight for our Wednesday Night Live show, which airs right here on Facebook live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Welcome, thank you for joining. I can see that people are starting to connect and log on. I can't actually see the comments that are being made, so thank you so much for saying hello. I do read them all back later, so I do get to see them, and I do really appreciate your comments. Tonight we are talking about young versus educated, or uneducated versus educated, the training timeline, and how we can stay ahead of the horses in order to continue their education. I want to clarify that, I do sometimes make the mistake of saying a young horse versus an educated horse, and I just wanted to clarify that we are talking about the horse's level of education, not his age, because I have started myself for clients, many horses over 8 and 9 years old, and so I know that there's a lot of horses out there that you wouldn't consider to be educated at that age. And I know that there's also a lot of horses out there that have maybe been ridden a lot. They may have been ridden for many years, but they haven't had any structured education. I'm not going to use the word formal education, but let's say structured education for a specific discipline. So they may be very educated in the sense of confidence. Maybe they've gone out on lots of trail rides. Maybe they've gone out on, group lessons and things like that. But they haven't had any structured education in the form of trying to get the horse ready for a specific discipline or a specific skill set, if you like. So we are talking about uneducated versus educated. We're not talking about the age of the horse, although I am going to touch base on that within the training timeline. And we're going to talk about that, how to keep it interesting. So the training timeline is something that I have had a question about that today in regards to talking about it on our show. And the question that I got asked was specifically for the vaquero system, so from the hackamore through to the bridle. So I'm not going to talk about that specifically tonight. I am going to do that as a topic on a show, but my partner Phil, who a lot of you know, is an expert in that field, and so I'm actually going to do a combined show with him and have him on board and get him really answering your questions in regards to that process. So I'm going to talk about a general training timeline tonight, and when I talk about a general training timeline, what I'm going to cover is some of the things that we need to keep an eye on, some of the things that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about our horse being ready to move on to the next step, so to speak. So the things that we need to take into consideration when it comes to our training timeline are our horse's age, our horse's skeletal development, muscular development, and the one that I'm probably most passionate about because I think it's left out the most is our horse's mental capacity and mental development. So personally, what I do with my own horses is I might start them lightly under saddle when they're about 3 years old, and I might put a month on them, I might put 6 weeks on them or something like that when they're 3 months old, and then I turn them back out. I bring them back in as a 4-year-old, and I put a little bit more work on them as a 4-year-old. I turn them back out, bring them back in as a 5-year-old, and I do that probably until they're 5-6 years old, and then I start getting a little bit serious about their training. So as they mature in their age and therefore their skeletal and muscular system, I can bring them in for work for a lot longer period of time. But each horse is an individual when it comes to their mental capacity. So you need to take into consideration their skeletal and muscular development, their physical development, if you like, but their mental development is up to each individual horse and how they respond to the level of training. So I can't really go into specifics about, you might do a 3-year-old for 6 weeks, and then you might do a 4-year-old for 4 months, and then you might do a 5-year-old for 8 months and have you at home writing that down. What I do is blocks of time, and I keep an eye on the horse's mental capacity to handle those blocks of training, and obviously the physical ability to stand up to that training as well. When I do start them under saddle, I do like to have them going under saddle well as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. I mean, there's some that I haven't started until they're 5 and 6 year old. So again, it does depend on the horse and the individual circumstances of the horse and what you're going to use the horse for, and if it's got any requirements that are put on it externally by competition or by, you know, being on sold or some such thing like that. What you're looking for changes in terms of our training timeline. What we're looking for changes as the time goes by and as the horse's level of education goes by. So again, there's no specific training timeline where I can say in the first 6 weeks of training you're going to do this, and in the next block of training you're going to do this, and the next block of training you're going to do this, because every single horse is going to respond differently. I have a philosophy that I teach primarily with a set of skills that back it up or run parallel. So I don't sell or teach a program, so to speak, even though I do have obviously skill sets that come one after the other in terms of you would teach this before this and this before this. So I do have a lineage, if you like, of skills, but it is overlapped heavily with the philosophy that comes over the top of it, that philosophy that comes before it and with it, to make sure that you're able to read the horse's body language and make your own assessments about where your specific horse that you're dealing with is up to and whether they can handle that training or not. So firstly, when we're talking about a training timeline, we're talking about the horse's language and our language with the horse and our ability to teach them this language that we're going to use for the rest of their life, more than likely. So first I'm going to teach them how to learn, and I'm going to teach them how I'm going to communicate with them. So depending on whether you're a subscriber to the quadrants, the learning quadrant, which quadrant you're operating in, you're going to teach the horse how you're going to communicate with him, basically. Then you are going to teach him the skills or a set of skills themselves. I have a specific set of skills, as do most practitioners or educators or whatever. We have a set of skills that we teach the horse, that the young horse, that they're ready for, which allows us to assess the horse in terms of their safety for us to ride. You know, they give us tools to assess and help the horse through problem solving. So then I'm going to look for the horse to be consistent in his response to the skills that I'm asking him to do before I would then move on to the next set of skills. So first I'm going to teach him the language that we're going to use. Then I'm going to teach him the specific set of skills or cues and responses that I'm going to ask of him. And then before I move on to the next block of training, I'm going to look for a reflection or a consistency in his responses, so I know that the horse is a learned horse. I'm not going to say an educated horse yet at this stage, but the horse is going to be a learned horse, and he's going to be giving me the correct responses or the desired responses that I'm looking for before I think that he's ready to receive more education and he's ready for me to give him a new set of skills or additional set of skills. So I hope that makes sense. Go ahead and hit the thumbs up or hit a button, so because I can see that from here. They kind of go up over the screen and I can see when people are responding. So I hope that makes sense, and if it makes sense, go ahead and hit one of the buttons so I know that you're that I'm speaking clearly, so to speak. Every horse is different. Every horse is going to respond in a different way. So I can't give you a specific amount of time, like, oh, it's going to take 3 weeks for the horse to learn this specific skill. It's going to take 2 days for the horse to learn this skill, because obviously there's so many variables. You and your level of education, you and your ability to teach the horse and his ability to learn, the horse's age, the horse's mental capacity, your consistency, how often you're going to train, whether you're going to train for short sessions, whether you're going to train for long sessions, whether you're going to train every day, whether you're going to train every second day, etc., etc. So there's so many variables that come into it. I can't give you a specific, it's going to take X amount of days to teach the horse this, because there is no answer. It's kind of like a how long is a piece of string kind of a thing. As you start to consider your blocks of training and what you're going to put into your individual blocks of training, what you're going to consider are the requirements of the horse within your specific discipline or your specific set of reasons or training that you're trying to achieve for the horse. So when you move on is not set in stone, but it's more about the horse's general understanding of that specific set of skills. So we've kind of got a colt set of skills that we use, and that's all about getting the horse confident and getting the horse safe to ride and keeping us safe during the horse's early education. And then we've got a series of core skills where we start to develop the horse mentally and physically in a good biomechanical way in order for him to be a good riding horse in both his training and his maintaining his good body for many, many years to come. So that's kind of our system, as in the TKH system or program or method or whatever you want to call it, that is overlapped by a philosophy, if you like. It's all about being clear in your focus, so applying your philosophy and your method at the same time. So you need to know what you're doing out there with your horse. You need to know whether the horse is a colt and you're trying to keep him safe or get him safe to ride. You need to know whether he's an intermediate horse that's learning a subset of skills, or you need to know whether he's an advanced horse who's refining skills and adding new, higher, more difficulty, skills with a higher degree of difficulty as a new challenge for that particular horse if he's ready for it. So the horse is going to let you know when he's ready to move on, either by consistency in his delivery of the response to the cues, or his consistency when he's asked to perform those level of skills or those specific skills in a challenging situation, say in a new area or at a show or within a structure of a discipline, so riding a dressage test, for example. If you're talking about a system where you're talking about upgrading gear, so to speak, so going from a hackamore into a two-rein setup, or going from a snaffle into a double bridle, or going into one of these upgrading gear kind of things, going from a snaffle into a shank for a Western horse, what I look for is consistency in the ride. For example, when you're riding in a snaffle bit, it's a two-handed bit in the sense that you're holding it with two hands. You're still cueing one rein at a time, but a shank you're holding one-handed, for example, and so the horse is really neck reining. So if you're having to rely on that direct rein all the time in a snaffle bit, then the horse is telling you he's not ready to go into a shank and be neck reined because he's not responding to the neck reining cue while he's in the snaffle, and you're having to support him all the time. And that concept is applied to the hackamore into the two-rein as well. If your horse is relying on you to explain things in at a deeper level for him, then he's not ready for you to just ride off your body and off your neck rein. This is summing up these intricate processes in 2 sentences, so I don't need a million messages about me brushing over the intricacies of the two-rein or the going into the shank or going into the double bridle. But what I'm saying is, if your horse is relying on you to really spell things out to him and use a direct rein, then he's not ready to go into any of those later on systems. So I would be expecting consistency in the responses at a very high percentage rate, over 90% all the time, and I'd be looking for my horse's ability to respond to my body and what I'm asking for, and not rely on that direct mouth cue, so to speak. in a gear situation. So again, I hope I'm making sense when I'm explaining this kind of stuff, because we're talking about, in one hand, we're talking about upgrading gear and moving on in the gear situation. And on the other hand, we're talking about an upgrade. I don't like using that word, but we're looking at moving on in our skill set. So for example, in English dressage, moving on from a preparatory test and going into a prelim, or going from a prelim to a novice, or going from a novice to an elementary. So leveling up, so to speak, in the skill sets, I would want my horse to be performing consistently at the level that I'm at before I would ask him to start performing consistently at the next level. So I hope that makes sense. So the other thing that I want to talk about, in addition to the training timeline, so I hope that made sense in regards to training timeline. That was a very brief kind of overview that I wanted to share with you tonight. And the secondary thing that I wanted to talk about came on a message from a lady who trains with us all the time. She's one of our TKH peeps. She comes to clinics very frequently, and she's got a horse that she's been through quite a long process with. He was quite a troubled horse. He bucked a lot, and we've got through all of that, and now he's her advancing horse, and he's really coming along in the process, and he's got a lot of really good stuff happening. And she just got herself a off the track thoroughbred that's very uneducated, and so she's had to go back to all of the colt stuff with the thoroughbred. And she sent me a message, and she was saying how it's really cool for both her and the colt, because when you're teaching a colt or an uneducated horse all the stuff from scratch, it's really stimulating and interesting for both of you, because there's so many things to teach, and there's so many little things to reward, and there's so many times that you get to say to the horse, oh, good boy, and you get to watch that body language, and you get to watch that light bulb go off between the horse's ears, and he kind of goes, oh wow, I understand that, I got that, you know, and it's a really fun and interesting process for the both of you. And so what she's saying is she's having such a great time with the colt, because it's all the there's so much newness in it, and you're really teaching at that basic level, and so you're really watching the horse, and you're waiting for those licks and chews and the clarity in the eyes and all that body language stuff that we talk about. And when it comes to our advancing horse, it's not the same at all, because our advancing horse kind of knows all that basic stuff, obviously, and our advancing horse, it's so few and far between these periods of time of him learning something new, and they can get a little bit crabby, and they can not enjoy the training sessions as much, because you know, they do know all this stuff, and so it's not all brand new, and that honeymoon period, so to speak, is over. So she messaged me, and she said, you know, this is what I'm experiencing, and maybe this would be a really interesting thing to talk about on Wednesday Night Live, because, you know, how do we keep it fresh, and how do we keep it interesting for us, and how do we keep it interesting for our advancing horses, so they're not getting crabby with the situation, and we're all still feeling that newness and that excitement, you know, every training session. So first thing I wanted to cover in regards to our advancing horse is us making sure that we are knowing why we're doing things. So what happens at a colt level, we, for example, in my program, we have a series of 10 ground exercises that we do, okay? So we've got 10 ground exercises that we teach the horses. And what we can tend to do with our advancing horse is pull him out of the paddock and start running through the 10 ground exercises that he's literally done thousands of times before. And if we're not careful, we fall into a slump of doing those ground exercises just on autopilot, without sort of thinking to ourselves, well, what am I doing this ground exercise for specifically? Because I'm not using it for a colt anymore. I'm not looking for my colt to be safe to ride. By now, my advancing horse, I should be pretty much confident that he's going to be safe to ride unless he's had a big spell, or unless, you know, there's a burr under his saddle pad or something like that, which obviously my ground exercises help me determine. But I've got to know why I'm doing these things, and I have to also raise the bar. I need to be looking for that world champion 10 ground exercises, and I need to be looking for my horse to present me those ground exercises at that high level, because otherwise he's going to start going through them on autopilot the way that I'm going through them on autopilot. So that's the first thing that I need to ask myself is, why am I going through these ground exercises? What am I using them for? And have I got the bar high? Am I really looking for my performance horse to be giving them to me at a level of at level expert, you know? The next thing I want to talk about in regards to keeping it interesting for my advancing horse is, maybe I don't need to do as many repetitions as I once did. Maybe one full circle of a hindquarter yield is going to be sufficient. Maybe I don't need to keep going over and over and over. I had someone ask me once how long I spent on the ground exercises, and I got them to set a timer, and I just ran through the ground exercises with Cooper, that's my advanced horse, and I did them. I wasn't trying to beat the clock. I just rolled from one to the next, and it took about 3.5 minutes. So what I really need to ask myself is, am I doing these ground exercises to a point where it is taking 30 minutes or, you know, 40 minutes or 20 minutes with my advanced horse, and is that unnecessary? If I need to take that much time, that's fine, but do I need to take the amount of time that I'm doing, or should I just be getting on with the job and happily flowing from each exercise to the next exercise to the next exercise, so it becomes a little bit of a dance, a little bit of a routine to get my horse nice and warm and flowing in his body and using his muscles correctly and all those sorts of things? Or am I kind of going from one and having a break and then going to the next one and having a break, where the horse is kind of getting restless and things like that? The next thing I need to do is make sure that I'm mixing it up for the horse. So change the order of my ground exercises. You know, maybe I go from 10 to 1, and I'm using my the TKH exercises as an example, but I'm sure many of you watching follow different programs or processes, or have your own little set of exercises that you do. So you can, you know, if you know your numbers 1 to 10 or whatever, you know, just mix them up. I'm specifically talking about ours, but whatever exercises that you're using on the ground, then, you know, you might just think to yourself, oh, well, I do a few bends, and I do circle my horse, and I do this, and I do that. Well, you know, you've got your set ground exercises. So go ahead and change the order in which you normally do them, because what we do is we get on cruise control, and we start running through the exercises in the same pattern as we always do. So go ahead and change the order and go from 10 to 1, and then maybe go from 5 to 10, and then from 4 to 1, or something like that. So you're changing it up all the time, and the horse isn't, you know, used to that same routine. Maybe you don't need to do all 10 exercises every single time. Maybe you need to pick 3 and do them for a couple of days, and then pick another 3 and do them for a couple of days, and just mix it up or miss stuff out for the horse. And then the other thing we need to do when we're talking about mixing it up is disguising repetition. So those of you that have been to courses with me before know that I have spoken about this on many occasions, and there are you know, lots of different ways to disguise repetition. So there's probably 1,000 ways to do a lateral bend and disguise that that's what you're actually doing. So think of creative ways to disguise the repetition, so your horse doesn't think, oh, here we are, we're just doing this lateral bend again. You can do a lateral bend in so many different exercises and so many different ways that the horse is going to remain engaged and focused on what it is that you're asking him to do, instead of just going through the motions of the exercises that you're doing. Make sure that with your advanced horse, you are asking for those, you know, maybe you're not doing a hindquarter yield, maybe you're going to ask for quarters in. Yeah. on the ground or something like that. Instead of doing that hindquarter disengagement, maybe you're going to do a hindquarter engagement. Maybe you're going to ask for quarters in. Maybe you're going to ask for something else that's going to get the horse using that same part of his body, but is that higher degree of difficulty for the horse. The other thing we need to start doing for our advanced horses is introducing challenges. So I touched on that briefly just then, where we talk about maybe doing a half pass with the horse instead of doing a hindquarter disengagement. So we're upping the degree of difficulty, but we're still focusing on the specific area of the horse that we're looking to supple up and get warm. I'm not talking about getting a cold horse out of the paddock and going straight into a half pass, because obviously you could cause some damage with that if you're asking for it in a high degree of expertise. You need to make sure that the horse is nice and warm and he's able to stretch and use his body correctly. But what you can do is start to ask for the horse to move in a specific way that allows him to get warm, but also changes up the degree of difficulty, levels up the exercises that we've been doing in the past, if that makes sense. So the other way that you can challenge your horse is ask him to perform the actions in a new environment. You can increase your level of expectation. Are you looking for that world champion exercise when the horse is warm enough and ready enough? Again, this goes back to know why you're doing the things. If you're doing them as a warm-up, then maybe what you need to do is put the horse on a really long line, or turn him out in the arena, or turn him out in the round pen and let him lope around for a little bit to get his muscles warm and get that blood flow happening, and then you can go ahead and go on to your ground exercises. What we need to also do is add sequences and start to blend them together in combination. So I've been talking a lot about ground exercises, but this goes up into the saddle, as well as everything that I've spoken about goes up into the saddle as well. There are 1,000 ways to do a lateral bend under saddle. There are many ways to disguise the repetition of our isolation exercises of, quarters, shoulders, laterals, ribs. There's many ways to disguise the repetition of using those different body parts. So it's about us being a little bit inventive and start using our imagination when we're going out to ride, instead of us just going out there and getting on cruise control and thinking about other things and just going through the motions that we do all the time. And start to blend things together and ask for sequences and combinations, and really start to look for that fluidity and flow in the horse's movement. And that is also going to contribute or promote him being a lot more supple and strong in his movements, because instead of getting braced in a particular movement, he's going to start to be ready to move his body in a fluid way, and that's going to keep the suppleness and the beauty in the movement. The other thing that we can do, or another thing that we can do with our horse, is testing the horse under pressure and starting to apply a little bit of assessment or a little bit of testing to our education. So you can do that privately at home where you ride or train on your own. You can go ahead and set up a dressage court, for example, and print a dressage test off the internet and go ahead and see how you go riding a dressage test. Maybe someone who's got some cows that you can go and poke around the paddock and try and move some cows, and specifically ask the horse to be in a certain place at a certain time, and put some, urgency or practicality into the movements that you're teaching your horse. Maybe you can go and learn how to put him on a mechanical cow, or go to working equitation and take him through an obstacle course and things like that. Start to test all the stuff that you've been teaching your horse. And what tests and assessments do is they show us our strengths, and they reveal our weaknesses, and they show us the things that we can work on a little bit more, and they show us the things that we might be able to raise the bar on and look for that next level of that particular thing when our horse is showing us that he's good at something. With our advanced horse, I think the most important thing is mental health. Mental health above all else, that's the thing that I talk about the most, and it's the most important thing for our colts, and I really think it's the most important thing with our advancing horses as well. So really cross-training a lot, so keeping things interesting and new and fresh for our advancing horses, and also playing with our advancing horses as well. So I know that one of the comments that the lady made to me when she sent me the message about this topic, this very topic that we're talking about tonight, she said, I think I'm struggling to stay ahead of my horse in terms of I don't have the knowledge to keep teaching him new things, so what should I do about that? So the two things that I want to say there is, one, obviously this doesn't apply to this lady because she is already doing it. Keep going to lessons, keep going to clinics, keep reading, keep researching, keep watching, reading articles and all that sort of thing, and keep your level of education going up and up and up and up, and every time you learn something there, it's going to help you stay ahead of your horse and give you new things to teach your horse. And I know that she's doing that, so that's why I said it doesn't apply to her, because I obviously see her at clinics regularly, so I know she's doing that. And the other thing that I tell people to do all the time, or the other thing that I talk about all the time, is just play with something. I think that what we do in the horse industry is we look at something that is of a high level, and something that we've been told is of a high level. So, a particular movement, like a dressage movement, like piaffe or passage, or, canter pirouettes or something like that. And I think that I know that they're difficult maneuvers, and of course they're difficult and they're challenging for both the human and the horse, and I'm not taking away from the advanced nature of those movements. But I think that what we can all do to keep things fresh and to keep things interesting with our horses is what we can all do is play at home with not necessarily going out in the paddock and saying, I'm going to have a crack at canter pirouettes today. But what we can do is start to break down those maneuvers in our own knowledge and think, well, what's a canter pirouette? It's a turn on the haunches in the canter. So what do I need to be able to do? What's the first thing that I need to be able to do on my journey to canter pirouette? And that would be to be able to have that horse very, very collected and be able to shorten that canter stride and have a balanced, collected canter. So I think that that's something that's easy for us to go out and play with. Yes, we can go out and think, I need to know how to shorten my horse's canter stride. I need to know how to collect my horse. And if I think about that and I think, whoa, I don't even have collection in the trot yet, well, there's my answer. Maybe I need to start going and playing with shortening my stride in the trot. And that's something that's going to keep things interesting for my horse, because instead of just trotting a million circles around the paddock, I start to say to my horse, shorten the stride, elevate the front end, give me some collection, and the horse all of a sudden gets interested and in tune with what we're doing. So I think that play is a very interesting is something that we all can do, and I think that play can be applied to anything. I don't mean to go out and I don't mean play as in throw caution to the wind and go ahead and try and do a canter pirouette tomorrow, but just play with lengthening your horse and shortening the horse and collecting the horse and maybe extending the stride and putting a bit of speed into the stride and stopping the horse and all those sorts of things. Again, I think we're only limited by our imagination when it comes to keeping things interesting for us and keeping things interesting for the horse. So I think that just taking the time to sit down and focus on something to play with our advancing horses gives us permission to go out in the paddock, do our warm-up, then have a play, and then get off the horse. We don't have to have these great, big, long, massive sessions all the time with our advancing horses. Sometimes we may need to have long sessions, but we can have playful sessions as well that leave the horse kind of wanting more. The final thing that I want to share with you about keeping our advancing horses interested and engaged in what we're doing is, of course, teaching the horse something new. So, you know, there's lots of different things from lots of different disciplines that we can probably look into and think, oh, you know, I really like how that horse spins or turns on the haunches. I want to teach my horse that. Or I like the idea of a walk pirouette. I want to teach my horse that, or a piaffe or whatever. And I think that we can go out and start to talk to our horse, break the maneuvers down and talk to our horse about what he needs to do. You know, you could probably break a pirouette down into 100 steps if you really thought about it. So if you think about those 100 steps and you start with step 1, then that gives you something to work on and play with and teach your horse in terms of something new to keep him interested and engaged. So I hope that you enjoyed tonight's Wednesday Night Live in regards to uneducated versus educated, the training timeline, and also how to keep things interesting for our advanced horse and of course for us. And I hope you're all having a great week with your horses. I'm still away on the Gold Coast, but I am heading home tomorrow to get stuck into planning or finalising all the plans for the 10-day course, which starts next Thursday. It starts on the 19th, actually. I probably shouldn't say next Thursday because I really don't know what date it is. It starts on the 16th, rather. I'm giving everyone the wrong dates now. So if I know there's still people sending me emails inquiring about the 10-day course, I do still have a couple of rider spots available. So if you're wanting to jump on, please let me know and we can get you a rider spot there. And I hope you're all having a great time with your horses. Please send any topics through that you'd like to see me talk about. I really appreciate you joining these Wednesday Night Live shows, and I look forward to hearing and reading all your comments when we're all finished. Have a great week.